Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group. This is our second meeting of 2023. We have our our agenda posted here right now. So this is what we're going to do today. First of all, we're going to have our welcome and general business and also our member announcements. That's what we're doing right now. And then we're going to hear from our meeting sponsor, Airbase, for a short time there. And then our main presentation today is Procure to Pay, and that'll be presented by Margie Komninos of PlantScan. Then we'll do a short tips and tricks, and then we'll have our open forum after that. So first of all, I'll talk about membership to the user group. So membership is free. You just register at rmnsug.org. When you register to be a member, it ensures that you get notifications of our upcoming meetings and the events that we're going to do. And then you also get access to our LinkedIn forum. You do have to be a member to get access to our forum. So if you are not a member, please sign up today. So where you can find us, our website is rmnsug.org. That's Rocky Mountain NetSuite User Group.org. We also have a YouTube channel, which you can just go to YouTube and search for RMNSUG. I think you could probably also search for Rocky Mountain NetSuite User Group and it would come up that way. And then we have a LinkedIn forum. There's our LinkedIn forum URL. You can also just search for us on LinkedIn and our forum should pop up. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. Actually, I'm not sure if I do. So I'll mention it now. So our LinkedIn user group is a closed group. So you do have to be a member to access that. Once you find it, you have to request membership, and then we'll double check to make sure you've signed up to be a member, and then we'll admit you to the forum. So I wanted to take a minute to point out that we do record and post every meeting that we do and every meeting that we've done for the last, I don't know, 6 or 7, maybe 8 years at this point. All of our meetings and the slides from our presenters are posted on our website. So you go to rmnsug.org/posts, and you can see there's get my little pointer here. On our website, there's this little search box once you go to the posts. So you go to the post section here, and you can search for content. So for example, if you want to learn more about saved searches, we've done several presentations over the past couple of years on saved searches. So you can see all of our presentations there. Just put your search in the search box and it'll come up and you can kind of see everything that we do. So again, all of our meetings are recorded and posted. So if you want to watch this meeting or any other meeting later on, or if maybe a colleague couldn't make the meeting today, you can always point them to our website afterwards. So we are excited to announce we're going to have our second happy hour. This time we're going to do it up in the northwest end of town of the Denver metro area. So save the date. It's going to be April 27th from 5 to 8 p.m. at Hacienda, Colorado. And that's in the Wheat Ridge area. And come and see us. We're going to have free food and drinks. There's no presentations, but it's a great time to network with other people in the NetSuite community, meet other people, see old faces and friends we haven't seen in a long time due to COVID and stuff like that. So we will be sending out an email invite and notification on that as it comes closer to that date. But please plan on coming up and seeing as we're really excited to have another in-person event. So again, that'll be at Hacienda, Colorado in Wheat Ridge.
I think it's called Julio's for that one. It's like a unique Hacienda, Colorado, just in case you only know it as that name. For
Uncle Julio's, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it says on the side of the building, but it is a Hacienda, Colorado.
So so Uncle Julio's Hacienda, Colorado. I wasn't quite sure, Dana, because I looked it up and I was like, well, which one is it?
I know.
In Google it says Hacienda Colorado. So,
Yep.
but Uncle, yeah, thanks for that clarification. Uncle Julio's Hacienda Colorado. Okay, so for member announcements, I'd like to just take a minute and give anybody that is here an opportunity to make an announcement. The announcement might be if you are looking for work in the NetSuite world, or if your company is looking for somebody to help with NetSuite or anything like that. I'm going to take a minute and just pause. If you have an announcement, please feel free to unmute yourself. You can also just post your announcement in the chat window if you'd like, and I can read that off. And then if you are on our LinkedIn forum, you can also post that announcement on our LinkedIn forum. So I'm going to pause for a moment, and if you want to make an announcement, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Good morning. My name is Donna. I've been to a couple of these so far. I am still learning NetSuite. I don't have any end user experience, but I've been playing around in the sandbox for almost a year now. I do have my first certification. I'm going for my second. So anyone wants to take a chance on me, I'd be a dynamic person to add to your team.
Great. Thanks, Donna. Rachel posted in the chat window, we are looking for help with NetSuite. We are new to this program. And Rachel, if you want to, if you're comfortable, you can post your company name. If anybody wants to respond directly to Rachel in the chat window, please feel free to.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Leah. I'm a channel manager at Orderful, EDI done right. I'm always looking for NetSuite developers to help our clients. We don't do any of the back-end integration, but we help many NetSuite users with their EDI.
Okay. Thanks, Leah. And you can post your contact information in the chat window if you'd like.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Rachel posted Blue Valley Cabinets in Knightdale, North Carolina. Peggy, do you want to just unmute yourself real quick? No? That's fine. RSM Denver is looking for experienced NetSuite functional consultants. Peggy, she is a board member with us, and her email is in the chat window there. Okay, any other announcements? Going once, going twice.
Yeah, I have an announcement. This is Roy. Not really related to positions or anything, but if you were part of the Boston outage from February 14th on Valentine's Day, you are capable, you have the capability to file a service SLC credit with NetSuite because they didn't, meet their SLAs. I believe it's 25% of that month's fee that you would get back. So there's a process. If you look on Suite Answers on how to file the claim, there's an email address. So you can get up to, I think, 25%. That's what we filed for. So good luck. Hope that helps y'all.
Roy, you spoiled my surprise.
Oh my.
And that's okay. It's totally fine. I have a slide on that exact topic that I'll talk about briefly before the beginning of our open forum. So I actually have the Suite Answers article and more information on that. So thank you for bringing that up, Roy.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay, anybody else? All right, we're going to go ahead and move forward. And again, if you're a member on our LinkedIn forum, please feel free to post those announcements in our LinkedIn forum as well. So I'm just going to take a moment to highlight our board members. So first of all, that's me in the upper left-hand corner. I'm Corey Anderson. I'm an independent NetSuite Celigo consultant, president of the user group. Then we have our sponsorship and member chair, Margie Komninos of PlantScan, who is also our main presenter today, and Margie is a founding member of the Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group. We have our communications chair, Mike Kackline of Vertifor, and then we have our speaker chair, Peggy Efleth of RSM US, and then we have our treasurer, Dana Larson of Dana Larson Consulting, an independent NetSuite consultant. If anybody has any questions or wants to reach out to us directly, please feel free to chat us directly in the chat window. And again, I always appreciate all of the effort and work that the board member puts in to keep this user group running. Thank you, everybody, for your constant dedication to the user group. So quick note on evaluations. We do send out an evaluation. It'll be sent to the email that you registered for this meeting with. Please take a few moments to let us know how we're doing. We do read and act on the feedback from those evaluations. One of the most important areas that we look at is suggestions for future topics. We do have a relatively set rotating cycle of topics, but we have some slots in there for new topics, such as the meeting we're doing today. We have never done a procure to pay meeting. And so if you have any meeting topic ideas, please use that evaluation to let us know what that is. Quick reminder, please use the same email to RSVP as the email that you received, the email invite. We try to maintain individual member records. We use a NetSuite production account to run the user group, and our customer/member duplication processes can be challenging, and so we try and just minimize those duplicate records. So if you received an invite to the meeting with a different email addresses, like maybe 2 different emails, please email rsvp@rmnsug.org to have the extra email addresses inactivated. And then you can provide the correct name and which emails should be inactivated.
I'd like to just mention something about this since I deal with this. I've seen some people have 5 email addresses because they've changed companies and yet it hasn't bounced from the old company. So if you also have moved companies, I'd like to merge your records and sort of keep it cleaner than it is right now. So, and I know that many of you also have 2 email addresses, a business one and a personal one, which is absolutely fine. But just know if you're getting inundated with these messages, or if you've moved companies and you've been with our Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group for a while, please just use that email address, rsvp@rmnsug.org, and let me know, and I'll merge your records. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Margie. And just a quick note, we currently show over 1,500 members as part of our user group. And we know that many of those are duplicates. And so I think it could be as many as 400 or 500 duplicates. I don't know for sure, but we're pretty sure we have over 1,000 members as part of our user group on an ongoing basis. Okay, so let's talk about meeting sponsorship. So membership to our user group is free to you, the folks who are on this meeting right now. The cost of our meetings is supported by 2 levels of sponsorship. We have Suite App and consulting sponsors. Suite App sponsors must be available through suiteapp.com, and consulting sponsors must offer NetSuite consulting services and have certified consultants on staff. You can learn more and sign up for either of these sponsorship types at rmnsug.org/sponsorship. Upcoming meetings. In May of this year, we're going to do projects, also known as SRP. And this is a topic we haven't done in a very long time. We've never done it remotely. And I think the last time we did it, we were in an office building in downtown Denver in a consulting firm's office, and there were maybe 20 people there, if that. And so it's been a very long time since we've done it. We're excited. We're going to have a NetSuite product manager, I think is his role, presenting for us on projects. And so we're excited to do that one in May. Then in July, we have our accounting spotlight. That is a recurring meeting that we do. And so we kind of go through some basic accounting topics and things like that. That's usually a pretty popular one. And then in September, we're going to do an inventory potpourri. So that means we'll have a kind of a smattering of topics, not necessarily directly related, but they're all going to be based around inventory and inventory processes and things like that. So that'll be in September this year. And then in November, we're going to do Cash 360 plus other cash related topics. We've done a cash related topics meeting before. We wanted to do Cash 360, but NetSuite delayed the rollout of the Cash 360 module, and now it's there and available, and people can use it. So we're excited to bring that information to the group in November. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you to our Suite App sponsor for today. Our Suite App sponsor is Airbase. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jordan Grant from Airbase. And Jordan is going to tell us about Airbase and how they can help you.
Great. Thank you, Corey. Appreciate it. Thank you, Corey, and also Margie for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So just let me know if you see it, Corey.
Yep, it looks good. Thanks, Jordan.
Great. So first off, we are doing a raffle today for a Sonos One SL. I have Sonos in my entire house. It's awesome. One of those speakers can certainly fill your entire living room, but really, it's an opportunity for you guys to take home a new speaker. So Corey's going to go ahead and put that in the chat. So feel free to put in your information, and we'll do a drawing at the end of the day. So thanks so much. So my name is Jordan Grant. I'm Director of Business Development here at Airbase. I've been at Airbase for over 3 years. I started the partner program and continue to grow out this partner program here. We've been a built for NetSuite Suite app for just over 2.5 years. We have over 250 NetSuite customers as it sits today. But I'm really excited that we're being sponsors here at the Rocky Mountain User Group, because this is something that I used to do on a regular basis, back before COVID when we used to meet in person. So it's exciting to be here again and have this opportunity. So this might look very familiar to you. What's a tech stack that's been existing over this last, decade? Well, it looks something like this, where you had some type of, credit card program, and then maybe you're using some type of expense management solution, and you had some type of request and approval process, and then maybe you had something to handle all those reimbursements, and then ultimately some type of AP software. And it's convoluted, it has lack of visibility and control. It's very expensive to manage. You're not getting real-time information. It slows the time to close, but ultimately something like this is what a typical process exists today for, I'd say, 60% of the companies out there. And so today, we live in this interesting economy, right? And there are frequent headlines in the financial press that call out all these big shifts, right, in the economy, and how finance teams are moving really urgently, I'd say, to take on these new challenging issues. And the era of cheap capital, high valuations, and a push for growth at really all costs has led to, I think, a lack of oversight, a lot of redundancies, and really inefficient processes. And now with today's high inflation, I'd say pretty rocky economy, I think CFOs and controllers, AP teams are really responding with a focus on belt tightening and really optimization. And I would say some of the questions to really consider here are, what type of, what adjustments has your company or team role had to make in the light of these trends, right? And how is the current macroeconomic climate influencing, your organization? And, have these shifts impacted the company's initiatives? Have you seen some of those layoffs in your company too? Or, how have you been looking at extending your runway or cutting burn rate? What changes have been made in the company spend as a result of these shifts? And so we are hearing this left and right. So just some of the headlines you see here, but it's very challenging. So here's what we're hearing from our customers and our prospects. What's important? Well, cost savings, efficiency, and digitalization. Having more significant time savings for the AP and FP&A teams, very important. Reduction of unnecessary duplicate rogue spend. Higher card rebates is important, lower payment transaction cost, but also scalability for growth and risk reduction. So being able to have that standardized request process, procurement. Today's topic is about P2P, right? AP settlement processes and tools, subsidiaries, right? So being able to really easily manage your subsidiaries internationally and domestically. And having an audit trail across from the entire organization, from department to team all the way down to a specific person in real time, from the time that person or someone requested spend all the way to the time that it was then approved to the time that the money was spent and then reconciled. You need to have that audit trail, right? And then stay in compliance. And then finally, application stack optimization. So how many companies out there are really looking to consolidate their software stack? It's very top of mind right now because everyone's trying to cut costs, right? Extend the lifetime of existing IT infrastructure, so how can we make NetSuite stronger and work better for your organization to help you scale? Easier to switch ERP systems in the future. So, we help a lot of QBO customers that are moving to NetSuite on a regular basis. So how can we make that process better and that migration quickly? Faster integrations of integration of acquisitions is also a top of mind as well. And so enter Airbase, really the consolidated platform, right? We're what we would call a very modern spend management solution where we have a whole guided procurement process from the beginning, what we call intake. So what is the process of buying? We create a really nice UX UI with that, a full AP automation, right, solution, right? So all the different ways of paying, whether it's through ACH or check or virtual cards or credit cards, we have a solution that can streamline that whole process. A full expense management solution, so it's no longer just using Expensify, right? You have to have AP automation, guided procurement, and corporate cards under one roof. And when you do that, you get full control and visibility over a company's spend, and you also get real-time, down to the minute spend information. And all of Airbase really was built with the accountant and the AP teams in mind. But it was designed for everyone. And so we really have an intuitive UX UI, and I would encourage you all to go to suiteapp.com and look at, our reviews, go to G2 Crowd. We're highly ranked there. I think over 1,200 reviews of our platform, 5-star or close to it. Extensive workflows. So depending on your company and your needs, we can provide, lightweight workflows all the way to, let's say early enterprise teams that need very advanced workflows around spend, and then advanced approvals and workflows around that as well. Accounting automation, and again, really, really important, real-time reporting in this environment that we are in today. So a modern spend management really has to deliver peak value. So consolidation of software is going to bring that cost savings and operational efficiency. Streamlining AP processes is also going to bring that operational efficiency that you're looking for, but also it's going to improve the productivity across your teams. And then uniting stakeholders with automated workflows is also going to be helping improving productivity, but it's also going to help you, with risk mitigation, and then reduce waste and spend and fraud. This is very, very important, of course, always, but that also saves cost savings because you're not dealing with fraud as much if you have a true spend management solution in place. And it's also going to reduce that risk. And then ultimately, what type of cash back are you getting back? And I'd say we're very competitive in that manner. Again, encourage you to go to our suiteapp.com listing, but I want to leave you with a couple use cases, right? And a couple customers that use Airbase. Doximi has been a customer of ours for a while. We actually had I think it was over 2x. It was actually a 3x faster close cycle for their accounting automation, a 15% reduction in invoice-based payments. So they were able to streamline through virtual cards, right? And then we saved over 60 hours a month in manual tasks for the finance team, which includes a 4 to 5 hours a week in expense reporting for the marketing team as well. And then ultimately earn 3x annual subscription in cash back. So when you're using Airbase correctly, you're going to start up, set up your virtual cards for all recurring spend. And then you're also going to use it for one-time spend. So you can move a lot of those invoices to get that cash back through virtual cards, but you can also create virtual cards for invoices if the vendor accepts cards. So just another way to think about, hey, how can I get some more savings? How can I get cash back? which is just top of mind right now. And finally, InstaWork, right? Same, reduce that time to close. Very, very important. Increase approval efficiency by 2x. This was important for them because they had, all these various different teams, various different departments, and a true, I would say, P2P type of situation where they needed a solution that was going to help with the intake of and a process of buying, but then also have advanced approval system. So in case someone was gone or something happened, there was a different group of people that could approve, that spend, and then ultimately saving that time and money by consolidating all their non-payroll spend. So, their card solution, their expense management solution, and their bill payment solution all under one roof, which was Airbase. So I'll leave it at that. I just want to say thank you so much again to Corey and team. I encourage you to go to Airbase. I encourage you to go to G2 Crowd and Suite app and check us out. But if you're using that old tech stack, 3 to 4 or 5 vendors today, I love the opportunity to talk to you and show you Airbase, as well as go through your challenges and your needs. And again, thank you everyone for your time, and looking forward to learning more about P2P and everything else today.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. And thanks again, Airbase, for sponsoring our user group meeting today. I posted the raffle link in the chat window, so please make sure you go and enter the raffle. The Sonos products are very cool. I have a couple myself as well, so I highly recommend checking that out. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and turn the meeting over to our main presentation, and we'll hear from Margie Komninos.
Can everybody see my screen and hear me now?
I can see and hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, good morning and thank you, Airbase, and thank you for joining us for this presentation on Procure to Pay, also known as P2P. In a nutshell, P2P are simply the stages that describe the end-to-end buying process from initial request of goods and services with a purchase order through to receiving, vendor billing, and a payment for goods and services received. But I'm adding in a few other things, including the return process and credits, because not everything goes as planned. And also some other important related features in NetSuite to help you with your Procure to Pay process. Please take note of my email address in case there are questions that I've not been able to address. The email address is also in the last slide. But there are 2 exciting events happening today. Not just me presenting, but for those of you that are fans of Ted Lasso, after almost 2 years since season 2, season 3 premieres tonight on Apple TV+. So I know I will be glued to the TV tonight. Just a few things about the presenter and the presentation. So just so you know where I'm coming from, like, okay, who is this person that's presenting? What experience do they have? As Corey mentioned, I work for PlantScan Corporation, and we're a manufacturer and distributor of ultrasonic leak detectors in the B2B marketplace. So I'm coming from that environment. I have been working with NetSuite since 2002, when it was actually called NetLedger. Board member, as Corey mentioned, and as far as P2P process experience at PlantScan, and also I do part-time consulting for, or have done part-time consulting for several companies, focused on business process engineering, re-engineering, and implementation, and I've written approval workflows for clients. So that's sort of my background. Regarding this presentation itself, is that this is the first time we are presenting on this topic, so would really appreciate feedback through the evaluation form on what you liked and what changes you'd like to see in future renditions. Additionally, if you find errors, please email me at that address and let me know so I can make corrections to the presentation. I'm using screen captures instead of a live NetSuite instance because response time in the demo environment, because obviously I'm not going to work in my production, is unpredictable. And it is sometimes so slow, it might take 10 seconds to get a response or 15 seconds. And as many of you know, there have been several incidences lately where NetSuite environments have been unavailable. I have not been able to get into my release preview for over a month now. So, and I was impacted by that Boston outage, and I did put in that information requesting the compensation. So the recording and PowerPoint should be posted within a week to 10 days. The PowerPoint will be posted sooner. I know Corey has to do editing for the recording, so that takes a little bit longer. And as most of you know, if you've been to this before, we do not record the open forum session at the end. So since a lot of that information is private and deals with your companies. Regarding questions, enter your questions in the chat window for the board members and you members to respond to, as I know there are some of you attending that are just as experienced, if not more, as I am with P2P. I will take some breaks between a few of the major sections to address quick questions that haven't been addressed in the chat window. I may ask that you hold off until the end or address them offline if they're more time consuming. I'll ask that the board members bring these to my attention. And at the end, we hope, this is the first time we're doing this, but hope to have some Q&A where we can open up to all of you to ask questions directly. Just as Oracle does a safe harbor statement, I decided to put one in too, because I want you to be aware that this information is based on my experience with NetSuite research and testing, but there may be errors. It is intended to share and summarize my experience of key information as it pertains to the P2P process. Or as they say in Latin, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. This is the agenda that I'm going to be focusing on today. I think the important things is that over here is this procure to pay walkthrough that we're going to be doing, and also a vendor returns and bill credit walkthrough, because those things are very key. And a lot of you may have some experience with procure to pay, but when it comes to returns, what the heck do you do? In addition, I'm going to be covering these other areas, including break time. So these last couple areas here, P2P approval options and advanced procurement module. Some of these things will be short, kind of just to give you a sense of direction, but you can imagine if any of you have dealt with approval workflows and options in NetSuite, that we could do a whole presentation on just that. The NetSuite terminology, I just wanted to go over some of the terminology that I'll be covering today, some terms that you'll hear. The first one, actually, I don't even think I bring it up, but I wanted to bring this up because oftentimes when people are doing reports or customizing reports in NetSuite, they're looking maybe for the vendor, like we'll be talking about today, or any of these other type of entities, these records that are considered entities in NetSuite. But they can't find like vendor name or customer name. Instead, they'll be looking for entities. I just wanted you to be aware of that. That's one of those things that when you're first learning NetSuite that kind of is confusing. The next is vendor, which is the company or the individual that provides the goods, services to your company. The next thing that we'll be talking about in this presentation is also items. So items can be physical or non-physical, because they can be inventory items, they can be service items, and we have something called non-inventory items, which is something like staples or pens or things that you don't actually stock in inventory, but you bring them in. So then the next one is expenses. So these are company costs that go directly to, hey, can people see my mouse? Corey, anybody?
Can you
see my mouse?
Yeah, we can see it. Yep.
Okay. I just want to make sure, because there are certain times that I'm going to be pointing to things and other times that I don't want you to see my mouse going all over the screen. So thank you. So expenses go directly to an account in the chart of accounts in lieu of an item that goes indirectly to an account in the chart of account. And we'll be talking a little bit more about this because in purchase orders, you can have items and expenses. A purchase order itself is the transaction for a vendor to provide items, materials, or services to your company. In NetSuite, you can create purchase orders, or as I refer to them as POs, for expenses as well as item. POs are non-posting and do not impact your ledger accounts. The item receipt is the second thing. So usually you have a purchase order to item receipt to bill. The item receipt is an optional transaction depending on your environment and if you actually stock items or you do item receipts in your system, even if you don't stock them. It's a transaction that tracks receipts of items from a purchase order, may be kept in inventory or not. This step may or may not occur for your business. Now, the next two I'm bringing up because when I was first learning NetSuite, I was really confused. Bill and invoice. I mean, isn't a bill an invoice? Yeah, and an invoice is a bill. So, but NetSuite differentiates them because a transaction bill in NetSuite is a transaction that is an invoice from a vendor for goods or services, while an invoice is a transaction that you send to a customer for goods or services. So today we're going to be talking about bills, vendor bills. And there are occasions in NetSuite when they still use the term invoice and they mean bill, but for the most part, it's been pretty cleaned up. The last thing I want to mention, the term is sublist, and that's a list of records that you see when a list appears on a record or transaction subtab, and I'll be pointing it out. So those of you that are new to NetSuite, you'll understand when people talk about sublist, what it looks like and what we're talking about. So if you go into the help section of NetSuite, not Suite Answers, but in help, and put in vendors purchasing and receiving, you'll see that it comes up with a number of the areas. All of these areas we're going to be covering today, except I'm not going to be I'll talk briefly about, but not much about some of these that have the arrow. So although it brings it up in the help, these areas, requisitions, request for quote, purchase contracts and blanket orders, and the procurement dashboard are actually all part of an additional module called the advanced procurement module. Since I'm trying to go into, I'm going to be presenting today on what sort of relates to everyone, and a lot of people do not have the advanced procurement module. I'm not going to be talking about that today, except just sort of a brief overview at the end. So the first thing we're going to look at is the anatomy of a purchase order. For those of you that aren't familiar with purchase orders or are just learning about purchase orders. So I apologize to those people that have been using POs for a long time, but this is going to be very brief. So at the top of a purchase order, this is showing a purchase order that's already been partially received. So up at the top, you'll always see what type of transaction it is. And then you'll see, after it's been saved, you'll see the purchase order number, the document number, the name of the vendor. And then over here is the status, which always is changing as you go through the P2P process. So this is saying that you're pending bill, it's been partially received and it's pending a bill. So the next area over here is what we call the action items. So these action items might be buttons or they might be from a pull down menu. And just so you know, most action items can be a button or a menu item. So I could make GL Impact a button by modifying the custom transaction form. And I'll be showing this real briefly as it relates to something else later in the presentation. So the next area is that is what we call the body. The body here, if you can see my cursor, encompasses a lot more information than this. I've just had to condense it to fit on the screen. So usually there's primary information, there's classification, and many other subcategories under here. So this is where all sorts of general information like location, subsidiary, things like that, your memo, everything that pertains to the purchase order as a whole And over on the right, you'll always see this summary box here, which tells you how much, the total, and if there are any discounts, things like that. So for the PO, the total amount of this PO is, this amount, this dollar amount here. The next thing that you'll see are these subtabs. So these subtabs provide other valuable information. And I think probably the most important, well, items, billing is just the vendor's billing information. Communication, that's a really key one if you're communicating with your vendor. Related records is really key. System information, I use a bit because it's like, okay, what happened? What changes occurred within this purchase order? And I'll give you the date, the time, what changed. But I'm going to focus right now on the items. Under the items subtab, you may or may not have two. Under the items tab, you may or may not have two subtab, expenses and items. Items you will definitely have. Expenses is if you turn on that option in your system. So under items, you'll see the list of items that are in this PO, and this is what we call a sublist. So sublist is a list underneath the main section. And there are a number of different sublists with any transaction, and I'll be pointing them out as we go along. So on the items subtab, I wanted to show a few fields. First of all, you would enter in quantity, and you would enter in units of measure if you're using units of measure. And I'll talk about that briefly soon. And then you could have an expected receipt date. Then you also would put in your rate, and it would figure out the amount. Now you can move these fields anywhere you want as if you customize the form. The other thing I want to point out is this closed one, which we'll be talking about. This is in view mode right now, but if you were in edit mode, it would actually be a little checkbox that you could add. And then I'll explain in a while, okay, there's closed here and there's closed there. What the heck is the difference? So we'll be talking about that soon. But one field that I do want you to note is this bill variance status field, which I highly recommend that you all add to your custom transaction form if it's not already there. And I will explain that in a little while and the value of that. If you do add the expense items or have the expense items on here, a couple of things to note is that you can actually enter, if you are a full user seat and have permissions, you would actually say, okay, so I want some glue. I don't have an inventory item. I'm not going to make an inventory item for that or a non-inventory item for that. And I just want to put it, expense this when it comes in. So you would put in the general ledger account. Oh, so you have to know the general ledger account? I don't know the GL accounts for all of, everything in our company. The answer is no. You can actually just set up an expense category like supplies, and you would enter that here, and NetSuite would know what that goes to. And I'll show you that in the very next slide. So expenses on POs. Here, if you want expenses on POs, you have to check this allow expenses on purchases in your account and the accounting preferences order management tab. And when I say you, I mean the administrator. Then underneath accounting, set up accounting expense categories, this is where you put in all these expense categories that you have. So you can see there's mileage pickup. Well, I'm never going to order that. Why is that there? That's because these expense categories are also used for expense reports as well as on purchase orders. So the way this category was created, because went in and said, okay, the name is supplies, and it points to this supplies expense. So then the person could just enter in the category supplies, and you don't have to know the underlying GL number. Now, where this is extremely important is that from the employee center role, that is where someone would enter in a purchase request that does not have permission to create a PO. So even if you have your full user seat, if you don't have permissions to create a purchase order, you would change your role to the employee center role and put in a purchase request. And in a purchase request, you don't have access to those underlying GL to the chart of accounts. So you would have to make sure that that expense category is set up. So this is the only way for an expense to be selected coming from the Employee Center. Now, by the way, in case you aren't familiar with the Employee Center roles, I think you get 10 free ones with NetSuite, and if somebody correct me if I'm wrong. And then I think there's some type of minimal charge for each additional access to the Employee Center for those non-NetSuite users at your company. So as I said, from the Employee Center, this is the only way to request, and it would be a purchase request. However, if you have the advanced procurement module, you can also do a purchase requisition from inside the Employee Center, or as a full NetSuite user with not having access even to purchase orders, or even if you do have access to purchase orders. And it's pretty cool, I have to tell you, and I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. So moving on with the anatomy of a PO, there's this related records tab, and underneath it, you see this receipts and bills. And this is where you'd find all your item receipts for this PO, all your bills, because there could be more than one, sort of the status, things like that. And then additionally, if you have done prepayments or have credits, they're also going to show here. They call this receipts and bills. It's kind of a misnomer. They really should say receipts, bills, ... And you can rename this to anything you want. So at this point, I'm going to jump into the P2P process flow. And what I have over here, I love this picture. To me, it's so easy to understand. And I love it because it breaks it down by roles, what you would do. Now, your company may be completely different. It may be that it's purchasing, inventory manager are the same role, and AP is a different role, or maybe it's all combined into one role. For those of you that aren't familiar with flowcharts, and I don't know where I found this, I did not create this. That's how I can say I love this. It's not mine, but I don't know where I found it. It wasn't on the NetSuite website, but anything in a rectangle is a process. And then this over here is just a document. So anything in a rectangle is a process, but anything in a diamond shaped flowchart symbol here is a decision. So what I want to point out is there seem to be some approval decisions here, there, and there's actually a lot more involved if you start using approval workflows. I'm going to be talking about approval workflows at the end, except I'm going to be addressing this one here because it's built into NetSuite by default. Then over here, it's got this approved 2-3-way match. This is actually another suite bundle from NetSuite that's free. And then you see things like needs receiving, because not all purchase orders need to be received. If it's something like expense items, it's going to go right to the vendor bill. So you create the purchase order, and then you maybe don't need receiving, goes right to the vendor bill. Otherwise, if it gets received, then are the items acceptable? Because sometimes they're damaged, sometimes you didn't get enough, sometimes you got too many, in which case you would go to another process somewhere else. Otherwise, you go again to this entering the bill, the vendor bill, recording the bill payment, and process the payment. So this is what we're going to be covering today. If this looks confusing to you because you are new to NetSuite or you're not familiar with flowcharts, here's a very simple way to look at it. You have a purchase order. You have an item receipt, maybe. And if your item receipt actually increments inventory, then it'll increment. If it's actually inventory that's stock, it'll actually increment it to a vendor bill to a payment. It's that simple, the process, although it's not that simple when you have challenges or problems. So how do you get a purchase order into NetSuite? Well, it can come from a purchase request from the Employee Center, a purchase requisition from the Employee Center, a full user seat internally. Of course, that's in the additional advanced procurement module. You can export from a vendor and import CSV files into NetSuite. We do that because we do, we're like, we have, our products are electronic products, and we build basically tiny little computers for a very specific environment. And so we order lots, maybe 60 parts at a time or 100 from maybe DigiKey or Mauser. And DigiKey or Mauser, these are companies where you, and I'm sure you've got other companies that you do this for, even for 5 products like Supply House, things like that. And you go on to their website and you order the items. So a lot of these vendors allow you to export what you've entered on the web. And that's what we do. We export from the vendor and then we massage it and import using a CSV file, and we bring it into NetSuite. Or this could come from a purchasing suite app. I mean, it sounds like Airbase actually has a solution, our sponsor this time. And then I know there are many other purchasing P2P suite apps out there. Directly from the purchase order, from a sales order here, which we're going to be talking about at the end. The sales order can actually generate a purchase order. Or order items page. So if you're using advanced inventory module, you have this special page that's called order items, and you just go through and select which items you want, and it'll generate the POs. Or from a work order, which is an additional module, which is work orders and assemblies. Now, there's even a more simplistic view of this, where you could just go from vendor bill to payment. So let's say that you buy nails. You go over to Home Depot and you need to buy a bunch of nails. And you come back with the bill if you're being billed, or maybe it was on credit card. So you come back, you enter in either that bill or the credit card, and it'll actually increment your inventory if it's stocked inventory. So, because I had one client that actually thought they had to come back, create a PO. In order to do an item receipt, they thought they had to generate a PO, but no, you do not. So you can do this right from the vendor bill. It'll impact your stock, and then payment. So before we get started in this P2P walkthrough that I'm going to be doing, I wanted to bring up something, since I'll be referring to this. And this is a sort of a reminder to use the reminders portlet. So the reminders portlet is really valuable, and you just go to your home page and set up, and depending on the permissions you have, you'll be able to see certain standard and create your own custom reminders. So these are the ones that, if you have permission, I highly recommend that you add these to your reminder portlet. So you notice you have bills to approve, bills to pay, purchase orders to bill, purchase orders, purchase requests to approve, orders to receive, things for returning, but there's nothing that says purchase orders to approve. That's because it's not built into NetSuite. So you need to do something else, create a workflow, or do something, customize something, and do your own customization, create fields and transaction forms, or add your own workflow. But what I do recommend is you create a saved search specific to your company needs for purchase orders to approve, if you're going to have some type of approval process. The next thing I just want to bring up before we get started, I already mentioned the allow expenses on purchases, but allow overage on item receipts. Maybe not for your company, but for many companies, you may receive, well, for us, an example would be we order 1,000 labels or 100 labels, but we get a extra labels. So for 1,000, we received 1,020. If you don't have this checked, you're not going to be able to receive that extra 20. You'd have to go back to the purchase order and modify it. Even more important is this under Enable Features, Transaction tab, Advanced Receiving. This Advanced Receiving gives your receiving and accounting departments, or whoever's doing it, separate steps for receiving and entering the vendor bills. So you go from a purchase order to item receipt to vendor bill. So it would, if you don't have this enabled, there'll be a receive button on the PO. When you click receive, it'll open up the vendor bill. So you don't have any way to receive your items before entering the bill if this is unchecked. So I highly recommend checking it. I think if you have multi-location inventory turned on, you have to have this checked. Also, if you don't have this checked, you can't handle landed costs because there's no item receipt, which is where you do the landed cost. And we'll be talking briefly about landed costs soon. So the two items that I'm using in this P2P walkthrough is actually an iPad, which is a stocked item. So this is a standard inventory item. And then I brought in a non-inventory item for purchase. And I just called it non-inventory, which can be received, and yes, for accruals. So this could be something like, well, in our case, Loctite glue, because we use this in the assembly of our products and it costs like $40, $50 a tube, but we don't look at it through the drops. How many drops are we using for each one of our items? So what's important here is that there's two fields here that don't exist on a regular inventory item. That is, can be fulfilled, received, generate accruals. So these two play in because if you have can be received checked, it'll show up on an item receipt. If you don't have it checked, it won't show up. If generate accruals, the next one, which is fairly new in the last couple of years, this actually allows you to generate accruals, and you're going, well, why in the world would I need that? Because if you click the generate accruals, which requires can be fulfilled, received to be checked, then you can actually find discrepancies when you analyze your PO afterwards. So find discrepancies between your the sum of your bills versus the sum of the item receipts per line item. Without that, you'll never be able to do that. Additionally, if you don't have generate accruals, although you can receive something in an item receipt, you wouldn't be able to change the rate. And we'll be seeing this sort of in action in a minute. So our starting point, oh, by the way, this non-inventory item or any of them, like, so it could have been a service item, other charge, as long as it's for purchase or resale, because resale obviously assumes purchase, then you know, these will show up. But if it's just for sale, the generate accruals, I don't believe shows up because that's for item receipts, but it's still, but can be fulfilled would still be showing up. So our starting point for this is something pending in approval state. Here, this probably was a purchase request coming in from the employee center. And at this point, you'd be able to approve or reject it. This comes standard without any workflows. And I'll show you that in a few minutes. Notice there's no receive button since it's not approved. So until it's approved, you won't have a receive button. And if you are the approver, you could click approve or reject based on what, you know, whether or not you want to accept this PO. So let's assume now, this I say steps 1 and 2 because we're assuming it's been approved. Now it's been approved. And then what's the next step that you do? Well, let's think about this. You need to notify the vendor, right? Well, maybe. If you did something on their website, you don't need to. If you ordered something through Amazon, you don't need to. But you have a lot of vendors where that's not how you do business. You need to email them. So you can email them outside of NetSuite. I don't recommend it. I recommend that you put everything inside of NetSuite. So you could email directly from NetSuite because that way you have a record of it, what happened. Otherwise, you have to go to your outside email system and back and forth. So if by default you select email, it gets emailed to what's on the communication tab. Now this here is being pulled from the vendor record. Now from the vendor record, you can only have one email, but here you could actually modify the PO to have multiple email addresses as long as they're separated by a semicolon. But what's going to happen is that what it does is if by default, the way your system comes set up, you click email, it'll just email something. And it emails by default the standard template that just says, open this up, and you'll need Adobe, or if it's HTML, you won't need that. So it doesn't have a lot of information. So you either need to modify the default template, or you can do something else. You can also, so you've got this option, email there, and it automatically emails this set information, standard information. Or you could go to the communication sub-tab and click the email button. Well, it's a lot easier going just, from this action, hitting email, right? But if you want something to open up, like in this next screen here, a pop-up, this is what you can do. So I have set this up for our company so that when you even click on the email, it'll act just like you click on the communications email button down there. So this is a standard message that comes, whether you're doing a PO or sales order, has very little information. So I would recommend modifying the underlying template, but it's going to be the same whether it's a sales order or a PO. So I actually like this because, one, I can say, which template. I don't have to use a template. I could actually put in my own verbiage down there, and you'd want to say something like, hey, please confirm receipt, scheduling, because you probably put an expected receipt date, scheduling, and pricing. Okay, so now if you want to set this up to work from that email link on the purchase order, this is how you do it. You just go to email preferences under setup company and check use pop-up for main transaction email button. But it is all or nothing. So just be aware of that. And then the other thing I always do, just so you know, since you're sending it from NetSuite and you're asking them to respond to your email, it will be captured back into the PO itself. So that's, I think, a real benefit of it. So the next thing that you would do once you've received confirmation is that you would need to do an item receipt. So you could do it, how do you get to the item receipt? So this screen is actually showing how you get there. You could go to your reminders portlet, which brings up receive orders, or you could have a shortcut right to receive orders, and then you click receive, which brings up the purchase order. But if you're like us, usually you receive the items, in there is a packing slip. In the packing slip, it has the PO, and you can just bring up the purchase order directly and click the receive button. So you could actually do multi-receiving right from here if you wanted. You could check several boxes of these, you could, even if they're from different vendors, but what it's going to do is it's going to accept create an item receipt like it received everything, and you can't really add landed costs or do anything else. So I don't recommend that. So the next step is entering the item receipt. I always recommend putting in a memo in case you need to search for it. Now on this, in our scenario here in this walkthrough, we have ordered 5 iPads, and we've ordered 1 of this non-inventory item. Let's say it's glue. So on these 5 iPads, notice that the quantity we're receiving is 3, not 5. And notice that for the non-inventory item, we're receiving 1. And take a look, I didn't change the rates, but here you could actually change the rates if it's exposed, because sometimes you get the bill, you already have the bill prior to getting the item, prior to getting the items. So you could potentially enter in changes here or come back later and make changes here. But notice here that I've accepted just the default. If this was a non-inventory item that can be received, it will show here. If it can't be received, it won't even show here. Then if it can be, if you have yes to generate accruals, you can additionally change this value. If you don't have that generate accruals, you wouldn't be able to change it. The next thing that I want to show is then the next step is the vendor bill. So how do you get to the vendor bill? So you could have gotten from the vendor bill from the prior slide, save and bill, if you already had the item receipt, but depending on your process flow and who does what, what role does what, you may not know that it could be a completely different role doing the vendor billing. So you've got here you've got in the reminders, purchase orders to bill, and then you could go ahead and select that purchase order you want to bill. Now here you could only select from the same vendor multiple POs to bill. Not otherwise it'll just come back with an error if it's a vendor, a different vendor. Or as we do, we get the bill, on there is the PO, so we go directly to the purchase order and click bill. So the next step is entering the vendor bill. And what I want to show you here is that we have this vendor bill that was entered. We actually received 3. We ordered 5, received 3, but they billed us for 4. Okay, but the rate still applied. These things in the red boxes are not showing on this bill. They're just there so you can relate to what was on the PO and the item receipt. Then the non-inventory item, or the glue in this case, we ordered 1, received 1, that's fine. But the received rate, which was the PO rate, was 15, but we're actually billed 13. Okay, so you may not have a lot of chimes when things aren't as planned, but we find it happens enough that we need to have a process to be able to handle that. So the next thing after you enter the vendor bill, because you may not know there's a problem, right? The person entering the bill might not have a clue what was on the PO, what was on the item receipt, or maybe they'll know what's on the PO, but not the item receipt. So the next step is to analyze the PO to identify and fix problems. So this is where this bill variance field comes into play. Notice here that it says journal not posted. Well, why does it say journal not posted? Oh yeah, because the PO says it was 15, but the bill was for 13. So that's saying, there's a problem. So you haven't been able yet to investigate it, but there's a problem. But you're going, well, wait a second. I have received 3 and I was billed for 4, but it's not showing that there's a problem here. Well, the reason why it's not showing there is because you, it's still expecting, it says pending billing, partially received. So it's still expecting a bill, and it's still expecting, 2 more of this quantity. So what you need to do, so basically what it is on this PO, this line item is open. And if you're going to be seeing the discrepancies at the PO level, you need to be able to have, the line must be closed. So there's a couple things that you can do here. You can either edit this and click on that closed button here. So let's say in this situation, you're not receiving anymore. They didn't have any quantity in stock, and so you're just going with the 3. So you could do either check this closed checkbox in edit mode, or in the view mode, you could say close. And what the close button does is it closes all of the open line items. Could be good, could be a problem. No worries if you accidentally hit the close button, because you can always go back into edit. And what the close button does is it checks all of those open line items, and there's a check mark here, so you can just uncheck them. The other thing that you need to be aware of with this line item here is, let's say that I had received 1,000, ordered 1,000 labels, but I got 1,020. So I over received. I'm not going to be charged for them, but I over received them. Okay, so this is going to stay open until you close this line. Even an overage would cause something to stay open. So now that we're going to go ahead and close that line item, we will then notice that it says closed, and now it says journal not posted. So now it'll know there's a discrepancy because I received 3 and billed for 4. So there's a couple of things you can do. I'm not going into this, but I just want to show you. There's this post vendor bill variance page. And from here, you can have 2 selections, purchase order or bill, because you can actually do this at a bill level. So it looks at every bill and every item receipt, and you don't have to wait for the PO line to be closed. So then you could say, you could click journal entries if you knew that you just wanted to write off that amount. So most part, you'll want to probably fix it. But what if it was just pennies off? Or what if it was that overage? You received 20 extra labels that you're not going to be charged for. So with those 20 extra labels, they have to go somewhere, or guess what? They're stuck in inventory received, not billed. And you're like going, oh no, because everybody wants that to be cleared out eventually. So creating a journal entry by hand or clicking on this button will clear it out for you. Of course, there's some setup to do this. So for more details on using this feature, go to our website and in the post tab search matching bills to receipts and POs. I did a presentation on this some time ago. I don't know, maybe a year ago. So the other thing that I want to bring up is that, just this tells you for each line item that there was a problem, but it doesn't tell you what the problem was. So what I've done in my purchase order is I created what's called a custom sub list, and I called it MK, so you wouldn't confuse it with the receipts and bills. And in that, I added a couple other fields that show the quantity and the amount. So then it adds up, it compares the item receipts to the bills and says, oh, it's saying that you were billed for one too many here, and the amounts you were don't add up. So you would know then more specifically which item in particular, because I actually display the item, is causing the challenge. So you can easily fix it. So things, you really do need to fix it so things don't get stuck in inventory received, not billed, and your CPA go, what is this? So again, this is not going into this in this presentation, but I did a tip and trick on this some time ago, a few years ago. So just look up custom sublists from our website post. And then finally, the last step is to pay your vendor bills. So from the reminders, you can click this, it brings up this pay bills page, and this pay bills page lists all of it. I sort it by date due. And the beauty of this is you can select multiple bills from the same, you could just select a whole bunch of these. You don't even have to look to see if they're the same vendor, but if they're the same vendor, it'll just consolidate one or multiple bill, it'll consolidate the multiple bills into one payment. Just want to bring up that you can pay your vendor bills from other places, like from here, from the purchase order using the bill button, from the bill clicking on the make payment button, from the vendor clicking on the make payment button, or you can go in and say pay single vendor, which is a page that you can select. So I guess at this point, I'm wondering if there are any questions that you all might have that I haven't addressed.
Margie,
Is
there's
everybody
one question.
there?
Yeah, we're here.
It's strange doing a Zoom call and not getting any feedback from an audience.
There's a question in the chat box that says, if you received the exact amount on a PO and then receive more, would the line item still show when you click receive? Or will it close out once the original quantity has been received?
It'll close out, I believe it'll close out once the original quantity has been received. What you can do is you can go back to that PO and add another line item, which basically reopens it. If you're going to be billed for it, but if you're not going to be billed, why bother, right? So, or you could create a bill.
Well, you still want to recognize the receipt of that inventory in your system, even if you're not going to get billed for it.
Oh, I see what you're asking.
Right.
You can go back and modify the item receipt. Yes. And say now you received, instead of 1,000, you received 1,020. Yeah, you can go back and modify that item receipt. Which will then impact what the PO looks like. Then I haven't actually done this, but I think that it would probably, if you manually close it, I'm not sure, but if it's just the normal route, I think it would probably reopen it, because at that point you've received something more than you were billed for, or that then was on the PO.
Yeah, Margie, hi, this is Suzanne. I asked the question. It's the case is like we have certain things, like I've received it, and then we get, for services, for example, some POs we have with certain providers are for services, and they build us a certain number of hours, and then we get billed more hours. So I'd still have to basically add another line or edit the PO, right, to add more quantity for that item.
I have to think about that, but if you could go in, if it's the item receipt and you're adding more, I'm not sure if you can, I think you can go back into that item receipt and potentially add more if it's the same thing, but if it's a different line item, a different service item, then you'd need to go back to the PO and add that line item.
Yeah, no, I'd probably have to change the PO because it's the same line item, but it's going to be on a different invoice, a different bill. So, you know, I'd be doing my receipt and my, you know, save and bill. So
Well,
I probably
you
have
could-
to edit the quantity.
Well, you could have two different bills for the same PO.
Oh,
So
yeah,
you
no, I know we have
okay.
multiple, but I don't, if I edit an existing item receipt, I'm not sure how that would affect the billing side.
Yeah, I'd add it to the original PO. And
Yeah,
then just
okay.
treat it separately.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
There's another question at the bottom of the chat window, Margie. Do you want me to read it or do you want to?
No, let me look.
Okay.
How to handle bill payment if it's paid by credit card? What's the best way to clear it out? Besides it and making sure it is no longer showing up in accrued purchases. Bill payment, if it was paid by credit card, well, are you using the credit card transaction? Because that's what I would do if it was paid by credit card. Or actually what I do, we actually have a bill payment. One of the options is to pay by credit card. What's the best way to clear it out besides it and making sure it's no longer showing up in accrued purchases? Well, if you bill, I don't really know, because when I do a lot of things on credit card and I've never had a problem. Once I bill it, I'm not sure how you are purchasing it, if you're using the credit card transaction to purchase it, or if you're using from the bill payment, you're paying via credit card. I pay via credit card all the time, but I've never had a problem where it shows up in accrued purchases. So are you talking about it being bought using the credit card transaction? If you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, so we would be paying for the purchase with credit card outside of NetSuite, I guess. So we don't really have a process a bill to process against. Sorry. We don't process the credit cards through NetSuite, I guess. So maybe we need to run through the bill payment if the vendor's marked as payment by credit card, and that would help clear it out.
Yes, yeah. I mean, well, there's two options. I don't use this first option, which is pay by, you go to bank transactions bank, use credit card, where you can actually enter it there, because of course, then something at the end of the month, you'll need to reconcile your credit card. What I do is I just do the normal procure to pay process. And then at the end, I have that vendor set up to pay via credit card. But then again, at the end of the month, I do my credit card billing inside of NetSuite. So I actually have a CSV import. So I export from the credit card company and then import into NetSuite. So I think NetSuite would probably recommend you use the credit card transaction. So I don't really know how to do it. If you're doing, I guess a journal entry would have to be used in order to clear that out otherwise. But since that's sort of out, you're outside of NetSuite and now you're doing something inside. So I would think a journal entry would be the way.
Okay, thanks.
There's another question below that one, Margie.
Oh, okay. Can you comment on the match bill to receipt checkbox on the PO lines and when it makes sense to use this? It sounds like the option was not enabled with the scenario presented today. Oh, yeah, I actually use the match bill to receipt because most of ours receipts, I want to match the item. If you check that on the PO or have it checked, by default for that item, then it will match the bill to the item receipt, and it won't have to wait for the line item to be closed. So every time you get an item receipt and a bill, it'll alert you on that post vendor bill variances page. So instead of where you saw over here on the Here, it would say, you'd use the selection bill, and then you would see different items here. And you would see that bill variance status, you would put on your bill instead of on the PO. So, but it doesn't work for non-inventory items. So if you have non-inventory items that you want to go through and find discrepancies, you'd be using both. So for those, you would go to purchase order and you'd see those line items. And then for the line items where it's just item receipt bill, you would go and select the bill. However, I'm not going into that, but I go into a lot of examples in this presentation here, matching bills to receipts and POs, and talk about the benefit and pitfalls of each. And when I created this presentation, the generate accruals option was not available. So I kind of dissuade people from maybe using this unless they receive everything at once. So I hope that answers that question. Take a look at that presentation.
Thanks, that answers it, and I'll check out that presentation.
Okay. Purchase orders is valid for how many days if partially ordered? Purchase order is valid for how many days? I don't think I understand quite your question.
I think it's valid. They don't close on their own.
No, they don't close. In fact, toward the end of this presentation, I'll be showing you a report that you should run, because guess what? They don't close. It'll just be lingering there forever. So if partially received, I think that's what was meant there. Okay. And we'll see that in just a few minutes toward the end of this presentation. Is there anything else right now, or if not, I think this is probably a good time to take a break. So, and you can see my screen, correct? Because I took it away momentarily. All right.
Yep, we can see you and hear you.
All right, so at this point, I'm going to talk about important fields on related records. So of course, the vendor record and the item record make a lot of sense. But what about the employee record? Well, that's a little bit strange. So, but I'll talk about that right now, so you are not held in suspense too long. The employee record, from the employee record, it can enable approvals without workflows. So it's a way of having sort of what would normally have to be in a workflow without that. So a couple things to know. This is only for purchase requests from the employee center. Although you can also be used, if you create a workflow, you could use these same fields I'm about to talk about in your workflow and use it for other purposes. Or by using customization and custom fields and custom transaction forms, you could accomplish the same thing outside of the purchase request from the employee center. So in this example, what I'm showing here is this is the employee record. So David has a supervisor, but he also has someone that can approve his purchase orders. So in here, you'll see the purchase limit of 25,000, along with anybody that reports to him, or where he's the, I should say, or he's the approver, also has this $25,000 limit. So notice that they have the same thing for expenses. So this is used not only for purchase requests coming from the employee center, but also for expense reports coming from the employee center. Well, you actually have to turn this on. So for this situation, David can purchase $25,000 without needing approval, and he can prove anyone that reports to him or has him as a purchase approver up to the same amount. If the purchase approver was left blank here, then it would be the supervisor who would be the approver. So you need to enable this feature, and you do that by under enable features on the employee tab, you click purchase requests. So this allows employees to enter purchase requests through the employee center. And this checkbox, approval routing, if unchecked, these transactions are only routed to the immediate supervisor. If it's checked, it'll go to the purchase approver. The other thing that I recommend if you're going to do this is you check to send the approver email message. You check this, automatically notify supervisor under the accounting preferences, so that the email is actually, an email will be sent to the approver that has a link right to the record. The next few slides deal with the vendor. So that was it for the employee record. But it's kind of nice that that's built into NetSuite without having to do any kind of workflows. The next few slides, as I said, is going to be on the vendor record. There's a lot of fields. I mean, almost all these fields are going to relate to POs because you have POs that are related to the vendor. So in the number of these fields are set by global settings as far as expense and payables counts, and you can modify them, but there's also global settings. What I want to bring up are a couple things. One, there's company and individual. So a company, obviously, that I don't need to explain that, but an individual, maybe you've got a someone that does consulting is a vendor, you consider a vendor. And so then that might be an individual. But here, this email address is the email address that showed on that PO that we went through in that P2P process, that demonstration, or that work step through that we did. So, but here, as I mentioned, when we were in the purchase order, you can only have one email address. So this is what it's going to use by default when you create a PO and email it. The next thing I want to bring up is terms, because terms usually is set for a vendor and doesn't change over time. Or if it does change over time, at least every time you bring up a PO, you select the terms will automatically populate, in this case, to net 30. This one I love, this default vendor payment account. It is new as of a couple years ago. I don't know, when you've been working with NetSuite for 20 years, the years start to merge and blend. But this here, I actually had a workflow to do the same thing. But now it's as simple as selecting it in the vendor record. And this is how you pay that particular vendor. So whether it's credit card or wire transfer or a specific bank account for some vendors and other bank accounts for other vendors, this is the default vendor payment account that will show up when you go to pay a bill. Now, you may need to customize this form to add to your financial tab, because that's where it appears, if you created your transaction form before this feature was available. The next thing that I wanted to show you on the vendor record is transactions. That's probably one that I use most. And this shows all the transactions related to the vendor. So all the purchase order, bill payments, bill credits, prepayments, etc. there. Now, when you put in, for those of you very new to NetSuite, if you put in type of like purchase order, if I were to go to another vendor, or if I were to log off and log back in and come to this vendor, it's sticky. So if I put in purchase order, that's what you're going to see. And I always find there's some confusion over this, because someone fairly new comes back and goes, but I'm not seeing my bills. And they didn't realize that before they had put in purchase order. So I find a lot of value in this. And I've actually customized my view to show a lot of different things, and you can have different views here to show like status, I don't know, amount, anything you want. This is why I like the memo though, because the memo shows information that might be valuable. Oh, and one other thing, by default, transactions is under the financial tab, and you have to scroll like way down to see them. So I recommend that you move transactions up somewhere so that it's toward the top instead of under a tab, instead of under a sub tab. The next thing I wanted to show you is the item sub tab. This is really cool. This is here you see all the items that this vendor could buy, not that they have necessarily bought, but could buy. Now you can't actually add anything here. This is coming from the item records, which you'll see shortly. But just keep this in mind. This items sublist is actually coming from the item records itself. So normally, again, you'd have to go to the financial sub tab and scroll all the way down. So again, this is an important one that I would move up under a tab, high up under a tab. And then there's the messages subtab. Do you remember in the PO that we looked at before that I said you could send the PO and then get a receipt back for confirmation? Well, what it does is it takes all your messages for anything that you've done a PO or credit memos or anything that you've sent, received, etc., and it summarizes them all, or it puts, you see them all in this sub list here. So it's not actually duplicating information in your system because we're using an Oracle underlying database. It's just sort of a pointer to it. So you don't have to worry about taking up space or running out of what NetSuite has provided you as far as gigabytes storage. It's just a pointer. So it's a table and it's all your POs, everything in this messages tab, including just sending a message directly from the vendor to using the communication sub tab and sending something directly to them. It'll also be captured here. The next is I just want to make sure that you're aware that you can make a payment. And when you make a payment from here versus the make payment that I showed you in our walkthrough, it actually filters it down to just that vendor. And your bill credits would show here too, just so you know, it's not just bills, but also bill credits. And I think, I don't know, journal entry show, I don't remember. As far as this, the vendor dashboard, in case you haven't been there, I recommend you at least take a look. So when you're in the vendor record, or if you're doing a search for a vendor, there's an option even in the global search to view the dashboard, or from the vendor record to view the dashboard. And what this shows, it's specific to the vendor, all this information. So over here is sort of general information and balances. And over here are your key performance indicators that can be modified for your vendors. And then down below, so this is just for your particular vendor, so you can see information at a more granular level. And then here, if you select the reports from here, like I said, it can be customized. It will only show you the results on that report for that specific vendor. So this is kind of like a home page. It can be modified like a home page. The next thing we're going to go into is item record fields. Some of these I will just be pointing out that are important. So there's these primary purchase unit. What's that? Well, if you're using units of measure, which is part of the advanced inventory module, you can set up your units of measure and say, okay, so maybe these are nails. Oh, this is a fan blade. I buy them in boxes of 100. Well, maybe you set up other units of measure. You can buy them in boxes of 25 or 50. But this is saying you stock them as each because that's how you consume them. But this is how you normally purchase them. And if you normally purchase, if you aren't sure what you normally purchase and it changes every time, then just say each. And then on the PO, you can say your units of measure will be a box of 100. But this is saying when I bring up a PO, a brand new PO, I want it to default to the primary purchase unit of a box of 100. Now, this is really important because if you have someone new and you say, oh, we need like 100 nails, and you meant to get one box, and someone goes in and puts in the PO and they go, okay, we need 100 nails. And it defaults to a box of 100. Then you're buying 100 boxes of 100. And they're going to be very surprised at the company when they get the bill and the items. So just be aware of that when you're teaching, training new employees. The next thing I want to talk about is track landed costs. And track landed costs, I'm, again, not going to go into depth. All of these things are part of our inventory presentations that Corey and I have done over the years. So you can find track landed costs and match bill to receipt. I don't know. I think you just have to go to that other one that I mentioned that I did like a half-an-hour presentation on that. But track landed costs. So landed costs are any costs related to the item receiving the item. So it could be shipping, which is the most common. It could be duty if it's coming in from overseas. It could be setup fees. So you have a vendor that makes wrenches for you. I don't care if you're going to order 50 to be made or 100, maybe there's a setup fee of $50. So if you don't use landed costs, and it comes into play because in the item receipt, which I did not show you today, and in the bill, you actually put in the landed costs. So you can do it by line, or you can do it for the whole PO or everything you're receiving at that point in time. But so for example, going back to that box of 100 nails, if you buy the box for $20, then each nail costs 20 cents. But if the shipping was $10, then the real value of each nail would be an additional 10 cents. So each nail really costs 30 cents, not 20 cents. And you might go, well, that's not a big deal. And some companies don't use landed costs. But when you start, if you're creating products and assembling items, you can imagine that all those pennies start to add up. Or if you're buying more expensive items, that shipping is incredibly expensive because it's a heavy item, it's motor of some kind. You can imagine that you should really be reflecting the cost of that item in inventory. Now, the downside, of course, is that you don't expense it right away. But the upside is that you're more accurately reflecting the value of your inventory, and you can more accurately figure out pricing of your products or profit for your products. So I recommend we use this. The next one is this match bill to receipt. I really don't think I need to go into that more, since I kind of already described that with one of the questions that came up. So I appreciate that question. So, and then there's the drop ship and special order items. I'm going to go into these next. These are specific to when you order or create a PO automatically, or create a PO, automatically from a sales order. That's when these come into play. And they are mutually exclusive. It is either a special order item or a drop ship item. So what they are is, if you order, only relevant for creating a purchase order from a sales order. When a sales order, if you have this checked, like the special order item, when a sales order is created, it will auto create a PO which is tied to the sales order for items being received at one of your company locations. And the same is true here. If you have the drop ship, when a sales order is created, it auto creates a drop ship PO tied to the sales order from your vendors to your customers. So if both are left blank, you can still set them in the sales order to drop ship or special order. So if you know that the product is always going to be drop ship or special order, you might want to do this. You might want to select this. So we'll look at this in a moment, a little bit more depth when we talk about ordering from a sales order. Because the beauty of ordering from sales orders, it's tying those purchase order items to that specific sales order, so they can't be committed to anything else. Now, here on the item record, I mentioned about the vendors. Oh, did I say we were in the item records? Yeah, we're in the item records. Sorry, the vendor sublist tab. Remember in that other one in the vendors record where I actually said, look, you can see all the items that this vendor that you could purchase from the vendor. This is where you actually set it up. So under the vendors, and this could be under purchasing, your title might be different because, remember I implemented 20 years ago. I think it's called purchasing inventory, something like that, purchasing/inventory. You'll see the vendors, and this is where you add them. And you say, these are all the vendors that we can buy this part from. So this is the purchase price. You might or might not have a purchase price. And you could select, you don't have to, you could select the preferred vendor. Now, this is really important when you do when you use one of these options, because if you're going to automatically create a purchase order from a sales order, think about it. How's it going to know what vendor and what price to put in that? So you have to have, it's going to select the preferred vendor and it has to have a price. But, you know, I don't use this very often, but still I put in all the prices as they're updated from the vendor. And I like to indicate who my preferred vendor is, like who we're buying from now. For non-inventory service or other charge items for purchase or resale, this is where I spoke about the can be fulfilled, received, and generate accruals. I'm not going to talk more about that except just to say that if you check can be fulfilled, received, once checked an item, once it's been added to this item has been added to a transaction, you cannot uncheck it. The generate accruals, you can check and uncheck. So are there any questions that are coming up from this at this point?
There was one, Margie, that said, can you identify if they are manufacturers here? And I think it was at the slide before this one where you were looking at the preferred vendor. Is that right? Jolene, is this where we were? Yeah. So I don't know if you can do a custom field to show on this screen. I don't know if you can customize this view. Do you know, Margie?
I don't think you can customize this view. What did you want to show? I'm sorry, I missed that. There, you know, there might be other fields on here too. I just kind of condensed this.
There's a need when looking at the item file to see which manufacturers are vendors versus, or excuse me, which are manufacturers versus,
like
my words.
Brokers
like retail,
versus the
wholesale,
actual,
yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that is not possible. There is an option to put a code in here. So if there's a code, like if you buy something from Microvision that they don't actually produce, but they resell, is that what you're kind of saying? You could, there are other fields here you can use, like code.
Yeah, I've got my words back now. It's really just identifying distributor versus manufacturer.
A distributor, you might buy something from a distributor. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think you can customize this, but I could be wrong. So if someone else out there knows that, please let me know. Okay. But what you could do is
can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm driving, so I wasn't sure if everyone can hear me. This is Gary DeWill. I'm with NetSuite. Yes, we can bring custom fields or custom lists, sublists into the item record.
Yes, you can do that.
Yeah, so if you want to label
this.
But if you want to label the vendor as distributor or manufacturer, you could pull that in, that custom record.
Yes. That's that custom. Thank you very much. And that would be a custom sub list that you could do. You can't customize this. And refer to back to that earlier slide where I showed the custom sub list, where I could actually see on the item receipt and on the bills, like what the item was and the quantity and the cost. That's exactly how I did that. So it's similar to this. And Gary, I really appreciate bringing that up. So although you cannot customize this, you could create your own sub list here that would look identical to this and have those additional fields. Additionally, so just refer back to that other slide, because that's exactly what I did there, because I couldn't customize the bill and receipts tab. But you could also, in the vendor name, because remember, this is your internal name, you could also say, you know, like hyphen distributor or hyphen manufacturer, that type of thing.
Thank you.
So, all right, so we're going to move on to going into drop ship PO and the special order PO. So what I didn't show you when I went through the anatomy of a purchase order is that you can actually select, when you're in edit mode, based on your permissions, what form you're going to bring up. Now, usually by role, that's why there's so many showing here, because it was sort of like based on role, which transaction you're going to be able to see, because there's certain fields that are hidden, etc. So here, what I want you to be aware of is there's two that come standard with NetSuite: the standard purchase order, the standard drop ship purchase order. Up to this point, we've been talking basically about the standard purchase order. Now we're going to go into the drop ship purchase order. I don't know how many of you are actually using that. So the drop ship purchase order, I think NetSuite created it to be able to ship, to be able to drop ship to customers. So that's wonderful. That's great. And what all that it does, though, there's only one difference between the standard purchase order and a drop ship purchase order, and that is this tab, shipping. So you can actually go into a standard purchase order and modify it and make it a drop ship purchase order by having this tab, shipping. And when you do, what it shows are these fields here, these additional fields. In particular, this is where you pick your customer. I think it's kind of strange the way that NetSuite lays this out, because really ship to should be at the top, and then ship to select. What is that? It should be next, and then the ship to should be, this is the address. So basically, if you have a customer that has multiple locations or multiple addresses you might ship to, here you select that it's Blue Pumpkin. And then under ship to, what's going to default is your default ship to address. And then with the pull down here, you could select other addresses and it'll populate there. What I really love about this, other than being able to use to ship, drop ship to customers, is you can actually use this for other things. You can actually drop ship your stuff to vendors or to third-party shippers that may ship something in a container. And maybe you don't want to have to create a location for every vendor that you have that will be doing some temporary work. So we have these unit cases that, you know, are like 6 inches by 4 inches by 2 inches that we send to a vendor, and then they mill it. So I want to be able to use the drop ship form to be able to send it to them, but I didn't want to have to create a location because I have so many different vendors we send things to. So I'm going to be showing you how you can sort of use the drop ship, not just to send to customers, but also to vendors. Or maybe, you know, so when would you want to use this? Well, if a regular drop ship, maybe it's part of a kit that someone is buying, and part of that kit, you know, is you call it kitchen kit. You're sending a microwave. Well, gosh, that microwave is going to be pretty heavy. No reason for them to ship it to you and then you ship it to the customer. So it acts like, other than this tab, it acts like a regular purchase order. The exception to that is when you do it from a sales order. And then if you here, this is sort of the workaround. So make a sort of bogus customer, a fake customer, and call it dropship vendors, call it dropship third-party shippers or consolidators. And then in there for the addresses, you're going to put in the addresses of each of those vendors that you might drop ship to. So then it will actually show on the PO, when you send the PO to the vendor, where to drop ship. So then you go back to this and you would select, it would say drop ship vendors, and then you select Deltronics or one of the other vendors, and in the pull down, and it will populate the ship to address. So the next thing is, you've got a drop ship PO. You're sending it to a customer or you're sending it to a vendor. And I said it's treated like any other PO. So where are you going to receive to? Okay, these are my standard locations that I want, but I don't want to have a location for every one of my vendors or every place that does consolidated shipping. So what you can do is, oh, by the way, this is an enhancement request to be able to drop ship to customers without actually having to have each customer listed there. So because you're going to do a regular fulfillment, once you receive it, if it's a drop ship to a customer that hasn't been from a sales order, you need to receive it, and you have to have a location to receive it in. So I recommend that you have some type of drop ship temporary holding area. It could be temporary holding for vendors, or you could have temporary holding for customers. And then you don't have to have, you don't have to add 100 or more locations that you really don't want to jam up your locations. You want to keep your locations fairly clean of where you're really keeping inventory. So the next thing that I wanted to bring up is that you can actually drop ship from a sales order, which I think is the reason this was originally created. Now, when you're in a sales order, the beauty of it is, and this should probably be bold, it ties the PO to this specific sales order, and it can't be used in NetSuite for any other order. Now, if it's not a drop ship, and if it was a special order, which comes directly to you, which we'll be getting into shortly, doesn't mean that anybody couldn't just grab it off the shelf if that's where it ends up on the shelf and use it for something else. But in NetSuite, it's not committed to anything else but this sales order. So when would you use a drop shipment from a sales order? Well, for large orders to a distributor or reseller that arrive on pallets or containers to avoid the extra shipping charges. Also, avoid time delay. So if you can imagine, like for us, we have these carrying cases, which are, a couple feet wide by ½ foot high and, 10 inches deep. They are very expensive to send to us and then resend. So even if it's just one, or maybe these specialized headsets, that's when you do it. So if a customer orders these carrying cases, or like our distributors do, or if an end customer orders specific headsets that we order just for them, that would be a great time to use a drop ship from a sales order. If you always drop ship this item from a sales order, then check the drop ship checkbox in the item record. So if you drop ship from a sales order, I want to show you sort of the process. Whether or not you do this automatic drop ship where you've set it up in the item record, or if before, when you're entering it and before it's been approved or saved, you select in this pull down menu, drop ship. From there, what happens is that when you save it, it knows there's a drop shipment. You've selected that. Now, what happens when you save it is that you get this process orders that runs in the background and pops up that says, oh, we've created for this sales order, because this is this specific sales order, so it has the same number, we've created these POs. So it could be one or more. Now, if all the line items come from the same PO, it's going to consolidate them into one PO. And then when you go back to the sales order, it's going to actually no longer say drop shipment. It's going to now give you the PO number, which you can, it's a link that you can click on and modify. So if you wait until after it's been approved, it's been saved and it's been approved, and then you decide you want to do a drop shipment, then it'll be a link. There'll actually be two links that say drop shipment special order, and you select which one you want. And in that case, it won't go through this, but it'll actually pop up the PO. So for when it's automatically created, that's when you need to have the preferred vendor checked and a price checked under the vendor subtab for that item. If you click on it after the fact and you click on the link, it'll just open up a PO. So you don't need to have that set under the vendor sublist. I hope that makes sense. So then how do you receive? We're still talking about drop shipment from a sales order. There are two options. if it's drop shipped from a sales order, the first thing you should note is when you bring up the purchase order, so you've been notified by the vendor, oh, it's shipped. So you want to bring up the purchase order and it says, pending receipt. Notice there's no receipt button. You have a marked ship button, but no receipt button. Okay, so then what do? Well, you can go to orders to receive or go directly, which goes to receive orders, or you can, so then you click mark ship. So you can mark ship from here, or you can mark ship from there. But I don't do that. The reason why is there's going to be no history provided that you'd normally see with an item receipt. So it's going to act like a non-inventory item, and it's not going to update average cost, last purchase price, and any of that. So it'll be as if it sort of didn't exist in there, in the system. And there's no way to handle landed costs. So I recommend, this is option one way to do it. I recommend, but of course, this depends on your business. Maybe this is perfect and you don't need to track the last purchase price, the average costs and things like that. What I recommend is that you receive this the same way you receive a standalone drop shipment PO. But since you can't do it from the purchase order, you go to here, you go to your receive orders, and then instead of clicking mark shipped, you click receive. And of course, you need to have that in a drop ship location. So maybe you've got 2 drop ship locations, one's for customers and one's for vendors. So now I wanted to bring up about creating a special order PO from a sales order, because you look at it and you go, special order, I wonder what that is. Well, that's a regular PO. So instead of saying regular PO, they just, it's like special order. And again, it's going to be linked to this, the PO will be linked to this specific sales order and can't be used in NetSuite for any committed to anything else. So why would you use special order? Maybe for an in-store pickup, a customer places an order for an item not currently in stock, an online order where a customer places an order and you want that item committed to just the sales order, not used by any other sales order or part of an assembly. You want to ship complete. A customer places an order for multiple items and wants it shipped complete and an item is missing. An international shipment. A customer outside the US places an order and the vendor won't ship internationally, so it needs to come to you first. So everything else sort of relates, except for a special order. It actually creates a normal PO that you will receive normally. So you won't have those 2 options. You won't have the mark ship. So that's the real key thing to note there. Now, in regard to this, I want to bring up a very important preference setting. This is the update drop ship quantities automatically prior to shipment, and the same, you've got the same option for special orders. And what this does, if someone comes in and the sales order, they go, oh, you know what, the customer comes in and says, we didn't want 3, we wanted 4. So then you go into the sales order and change it to 4. Now, if you don't have this checked, now the sales order says 4 and the purchase order says 3, and basically your link is broken because they don't match. So if you do that, you can have unexpected consequences. So it could be that it permanently breaks the link between the 2 and that item is no longer treated as no longer committed to that sales order. So if you check this, it'll automatically go out and update the PO if you update the sales order, and vice versa. If you update the PO, it'll update the sales order. And of course, there's some conditions that need to be met here. Obviously, it can't be already filled or marked shipped, things like that. There's a couple other here that you should look at in your free time. And one of those is the include committed quantities, because if you disable this, then the include committed quantities, if you uncheck that, then it creates a back order. It creates the PO only for the back ordered quantity. So you do want to look at this and decide what's right for your company. And also the limit vendor list on items from the sales order. So I recommend that you look at that field level help to get more information. Okay, are there any questions on this that I can answer that haven't been already been addressed? Okay, no, thank you, thank you. All right, so I'm going to move on into a new area. And that is, we're now going to talk about and demonstrate a walkthrough for the vendor return process, because it'll inevitably happen to you and you'll go, oh my gosh, what the heck do I do? So this is a diagram that I found on the web too. And for returns, you can see that there's lots of approval options here that I'll talk about, toward the end of this when we talk about approvals. But you keep seeing this word over and over again, vendor return authorization, vendor return authorization. So this is basically the vendor return authorization is one of the key forms if you're actually returning product, but maybe you're not returning product. So we need to look at the different options. What I want to show you, and I've highlighted here, is the endpoint is a bill credit. So however you start, because you can start from a PO, you can start from a bill, the return vendor authorization form itself, or directly from a bill credit. This is an ending point where you will end up with a bill credit that needs to be either, a check will be sent to you, or it'll be a bill credit that will actually be applied to other bills for the same vendor. So I have this little slide in here, a list of bill credits. So you can actually see, and I did created from. So you can see like this bill credit was created from itself, maybe for something like some type of a discount you got, or a check that you got from the vendor itself for sales, and a reward or something. Or you could see that a bill credit here came from the bill itself, or a bill credit here came from the vendor return authorization. The vendor return authorization could have been initiated directly or indirectly from a PO or a bill. So I just wanted you to see that you can hop in this process in many different locations. So let's look at the most simple process here, where you're doing a refund only process. So you've bought something and they don't want it back. I don't know, this happens a lot in Amazon. You order something and they go, oh, we'll credit you, but you don't need to return the product. So in this situation, which probably wouldn't be the case, you've got an iPad that's not working or is damaged, and they're saying, okay, you don't need to return it. Only if only that were the case, but we'll go ahead and credit you. So from the bill, you cannot do a bill credit from a PO. So you actually have to do this from the bill or a bill credit. I recommend you doing from the bill so it ties it together. The bill credit is tied to the bill and you can see it in related records. It leaves a trace. So from the vendor bill, you just click credit since you're not returning the items, which transitions to the bill credit form. You modify the items to only reflect what's being credited, because maybe you bought 5 iPads and only one of them is being credited. You need to delete any shipping or landed cost lines. And then you would go ahead and save that. So this is the refund only process. It's very simple, just 2 steps. And you'd get the bill credit, and then you would apply the bill credit to other bills, or you might get a refund check if that's how you work with your vendor. So these are kind of the steps if you want to actually return a product. So this is more intensive and probably more the situation where you're going to return a product. Maybe you over ordered because you didn't mean to order 100 boxes of 100 nails, so you need to return 99 of them. Or maybe it's defective, who knows what it could be. So these are the steps, and you keep seeing this vendor return authorization. At any rate, I'm not going to go into this now. I'm going to go into this as we're walking through. This is just sort of as a reminder and sort of summarizes what you go through for when you go back to this presentation, but we're going to go through these steps now. So the step 1, would be from the bill or the purchase order, you could authorize the return. And the authorize return button then transitions to the vendor return authorization form. So from this form, just like we did in that last example where you're just not getting a, you're getting a refund, but you didn't return the product, you change the quantity, you remove any lines that you aren't returning, you delete any lines for landed cost, and then you would click the approve button. Now, maybe you aren't the person returning it. It's a different role. So in that case, you would go to the ship vendor returns page and you would select which one you are returning at this point in time. So you just check the button and it would transition to the item fulfillment form. Or depending on how your company is set up, maybe you are the same person and you write from that vendor return authorization. You don't even need to get out of there. You can just click the return button, which also transitions to that same item fulfillment form. So from here, you complete this form, what you're returning. And after you save this, it transitions back to the return authorization form. Now, you saw in those reminders, there was like 3 different things for vendor return authorization that for the returning things that dealt with that in the reminders. So you might, depending on your role, you might be going there to get to this page, but you get to this and you then click refund. You go, okay, well, we need a refund. And this refund transitions to the bill credit. So just so you know, if you were in the vendor return authorization form, let's see, you refund from there and then the bill credit. The next step would be to do one of the following. So the bill credit, sometimes you're going to have a restocking fee. Like you're returning a computer, they're going to maybe charge 15%. So you need to add any lines for restocking fees. Restocking fee could be added as a discount item, so you could actually be an item, or maybe it's on the expense tab itself. And then or if this was just a credit card thing, you could go do a credit card transaction. And when you're in the credit card transaction, you actually select a credit instead of purchasing it, and it would take that item out of stock. Now, the problem with that is it's not related to the PO if there's a PO. So just to be aware. And also if you're using average cost, you're going to see that there's a couple interesting lines in the general when you look at the journal entry that's created, the GL impact. So what I really recommend is even if it's to a credit card, maybe you go through this step too. I'm not going to go into the next steps. I'm giving you the sweet answers because maybe you'll receive a check that needs to be applied and you have to receive a check and then you need to apply that check to the bill credit to wipe it out, or a vendor credit. And then a vendor credit can be used for this particular bill or it can be applied to other bills. So this is just a diagram that I found these diagrams and I just kind of entered my little 2 bits here. So this is just showing receiving a refund from a vendor, you make a deposit, you apply to the vendor, you update the vendor bill. This is a credit. You create the vendor credit, which we've just seen. You apply the credit to PO the transaction and or to other bills. So are there any questions on this that are in the chat that haven't been addressed? What if you're returning an item but not receiving any credit? Well, that seems to be a problem. I mean, you need to contact the vendor, obviously, and get a credit, but I guess I'm not really sure why you would have a returning an item but not receiving any credit. So maybe we can take this offline.
You could just do an inventory adjustment and you know.
Oh, I see.
And then send it back. Right.
Well, they're not receiving credit. You want to, basically what you're saying is you want to get it out of inventory. Yes. If you just want to get it out of inventory, you do an inventory adjustment, but it just seems strange that you wouldn't, you might not get a replacement, but yeah, but if there's a replacement, then you want to get that bill credit or get a refund. So I would go through the entire process. But if you're, I can't imagine a situation where returning an item but not receiving any credit. So, but if that's the case, yes, just like Dana said, an inventory adjustment, if you're just trying to get it out of inventory. But if you're getting a replacement, then you want to do a bill credit, and then it can be applied to, because that bill then would be open because you haven't received it yet. So then you would just apply it to the same purchase order. As far,
Sorry, quick question. I had entered a return authorization from the bill, but it kept showing those quantities received in the PO. So is it better to enter the return authorization to the PO, and then it would reduce the quantity that's actually been received?
if you do the vendor authorization form from the PO and you start there, which is where I usually do it, it would impact the PO versus from a bill. I'm not sure that it would, because I've always done it from the PO. But if you're finding from a bill it doesn't impact the PO, then that's probably the answer for you. You should do it from the PO.
Okay, thanks.
I always do it from the PO myself. The vendor prepayments, I'm going to move, if there's no other questions, I'm going to move into the vendor prepayments. And the vendor prepayments allows you to, I love this feature because it didn't always exist. And otherwise, prior to this vendor prepayments existing, there was actually a suite solutions that you could buy and install. And I think eventually they just gave it away for free. It allows you to prepay a vendor, either partially or in full prior to receiving the items and services. So it's an alternative to bill in advance of receipt. I don't like bill in advance of receipt. It caused a lot of problems for this. So I had it on originally because there was no vendor prepayments. But the upside is it allows you to bill POs before you receive them. The downside is it causes problems with the post-vendor bill variance feature, because if you're doing it at the bill level and you're receiving and you're paying the bill before you receive the item receipt does not show in the bill. And usually you'd have to go back to the bill and select the item receipt. At any rate, it's not going to automatically show, and I don't like it. Additionally, the other reason why I don't like bill in advance of receipt is when you go to bill your purchase orders page, all the POs show up, even if not received. So then it gets a little confusing, and then maybe somebody's accidentally paying something in advance that they didn't need to. So I recommend, for whatever reason, you have to pay in advance of receipt or bill in advance of receipt and pay it, that you use vendor prepayments. These are the setup actions that you need to do. I'm not going into them now, but I am going to say a couple things. One, if you do enter prepayments a lot, instead of making it a drop down from the action, from the menu, make it a button. And this is how you do it from the custom transaction form. You just go through and you say, oh, I want this to be a button. You change it from menu to button. The other thing that you might have to do if you created your transaction forms and you're using a custom transaction form prior to this feature being available is you want to be able to see the prepayment balance, because you might have leftover funds, like maybe you overpaid, or you always just need to be able to see that on the financial tab. And it won't show if a custom transaction form that was created prior to this feature. So you want to go to your custom entry form and check prepayment balance to show underneath that financial sub tab. There's two ways you can use vendor prepayments. One is it's associated with the purchase order, and the other is not associated with a specific purchase order. So we're going to look at both of these. And when I say associated with purchase order prepayment, you can have more than one prepayment associated with a purchase order. So this is the one that we use most frequently under vendor prepayments. I mean, when would you use the other? Maybe if they needed a retainer fee or something. But enter vendor prepayments from a PO is what's most commonly used for us. So you click on the enter prepayment button, which brings up the vendor prepayment, which transitions to the vendor prepayment form. Now you can see that automatically it's populated the vendor name and the purchase order. And it comes up with an account that you've set up as a standard account for prepaying your vendors. And you can always change this. And then it comes up with the full payment amount, which you can change. Maybe it was just 50% down you needed, so you would change this amount. And again, I would put in a memo. You complete the form, and after saving it, it will appear under your related records, under receipts and bills. I didn't highlight this in yellow, but that's really highlighted. And vendor prepayments show there too. So like I said, this is kind of a misnomer, and you can rename your tabs and subtabs to be something else. Because when I first did this, I was like, well, where did the vendor prepayments show up? And there it was. So after saving, then you receive it, and you've received the, you've done the item receipt, you receive the bill. And what's really nice about this is that if you have it being automatically applied, you don't even have to say make payment. It just shows paid in full. And you could look at the related records on this bill and see the vendor prepayment, that the vendor prepayment application was applied to this. Now, there are times when you might have leftover funds, like maybe it was an estimate and you overpaid. So NetSuite can actually handle that. So here, let's say you have leftover funds to apply to other bills. How would you do that? It's kind of confusing because you want to, your thought is to go to the, where is this? Well, the thought would be to go directly to this, the vendor prepayment application, but you can't get there directly. I think if you create your own shortcut, you probably could. But if you just look in the global search for vendor prepayment application, so you can apply it to other bills, you can't get there. So you go to your vendor prepayments, you click the view, and then you click the apply button, and then you could apply it to any other open bills. Now, the second option is you enter vendor prepayments not linked to a purchase order. So you just go right into the vendor prepayment form itself, that page, and notice you could actually assign a PO at this point, but you'd probably be leaving it blank because we're not wanting to link this to a PO. You just put in that payment amount like you did before, and then after you save it, you go to the vendor prepayment and you click apply, and then you can apply this to any bill. So it looks like a lot like when you've got leftover funds. It's basically treated the same way. Okay, so that's it with vendor prepayments. I don't know if there are any questions, quick questions on there.
There's one about the AvidXchange Suite app with the prepayments. And I have not had experience with that. I don't know if you have, Margie.
No, I don't have any experience with AvidXchange and prepayments. And I guess you're talking about with the Suite app, not with paying them.
Right. So you go with the AvidXchange, you're going to pay your vendor, but you don't want to put a bill in, you want to put a prepayment in. And so how do you get it to send to Avid? And
how do you get it to send to Avid?
Because Avid actually releases the fund, the Avid Pay is that AP management. So it's probably because Michael, I would suggest you ask him about that transaction type, because you probably have it set up right now just to do bills. And if maybe they could enable the vendor prepayment. Okay.
Yeah, so sorry, Michael, I don't use AvidXchange, so I can't really respond to that. I'm going to talk briefly about blanket purchase order options. Of course, you could buy a Suite app. You buy the advanced procurement module from NetSuite, which includes the blanket purchase orders. Ooh, and I'm running out of time. So no more questions right now. You could create POs with duplicate line items. This is what I've seen some clients do with different delivery dates. You create a custom field and indicate the blanket purchase order, and then do releases off of that using some common thread like a PO with a suffix or prefix. However, you'd need to create a safe search so you can easily find all releases. And how do you really know that you aren't overextending yourself on the blanket PO and are requesting more than you can get on that blanket purchase order. Then there's this create PO with item quantities and create a custom record that is linked to it for releases. This is what I did because there was no blanket, there was no advanced procurement module when I came up with a solution for blanket purchase orders. So regardless of if you're doing the last two options, they probably have this, but otherwise I recommend creating a custom body field on your PO to indicate that it is a blanket purchase order, which will allow you to search and filter when you're paying bills and looking at POs, whether or not it's a PO that should have been received or it's a blanket purchase order that you really don't want to have to investigate at this point in time. So very briefly, and I apologize because I'm probably going to go over to 11:15. Is that okay, Corey?
Yeah, that's fine, Margie.
Okay.
No problem.
So this is the custom record that I created. And you can see that this has the product release from a PO. And because the transaction is apparent to this in the fields in this custom record, it shows new product release. Under the product release tab, I click new product release, it brings this up and I just enter in, my quantity to be released and who's going to, and then notice under here, under my custom record, I actually have created a custom sub list to show all the other releases for this PO. So I can start, and I also have this dynamic field here, this dynamic custom field, which shows what's on the PO. So I can see when I'm getting close to completing that blanket purchase order. From there, you could either directly from the custom record, send a release email, or from the PO, or you create a saved search if there are multiple releases that you're doing for the same vendor. Moving into the key products, there really isn't much that I wanted to bring up here, except that this is what you see when you go to the reports page and you can customize these reports. And this is where maybe you'd be using that, looking for a specific entity that you're filtering on an entity rather than looking for a customer name or a vendor name. Or you can create your own saved searches or use Suite Analytics. With Suite Analytics, they actually have a couple workbooks that are standard, the data sets that are standard for you to create your own workbook. The first report that is used a lot is this AP aging summary report. So this kind of shows you, I really like this report because it shows you can break down, first of all, it's by default by due date. I believe it's by due date. And then you can break down into your intervals of like 30 days, how many intervals you want to see. So you can really see, taking a look from one place, all your vendors and maybe what's past due. What's really cool about this is you can click on the vendor name itself. And from the vendor name, you can say make payment and see all the bills that you need to pay for that specific vendor. The other one that's really key that I mentioned earlier is this, that you're going to have, if you have these open POs that are lingering because not everything's been received on it or items have been over received, this shows you all those open purchase orders. So like once a month, you should probably go through and go, oh my gosh, this is from 2021. I haven't received the bill, or this one's saying pending receipt because maybe you over received something and you're not going to be billed for. You really want to start cleaning these up because otherwise, if you've got things that are pending receipt, that means that there are things being stuck in that inventory received not billed, which you really want to clear out. And finally, the purchase order history report. This is if you need to kind of do a deep dive and you can filter on purchase order if you want. You can customize this report to filter on that. And you can see exactly everything that happened for a PO by each line item. Looking at the options for approving transactions. So this could be a whole presentation in and of itself, but you can use the built-in approval option for purchase requests from the Employee Center as discussed previously, or you could reuse some of those fields that I showed you from the employee record and create your own workflow. Or you could create custom fields or use some of the accounting preferences to the right. See how these all deal with returns? Well, not all of them. This deals with bills. So there are some fields that NetSuite provides that you could use if you wanted to not, if you didn't want to create a workflow, you could kind of hack your way around by creating custom fields. So who could see this, and who has permission levels on this, and do this without a workflow. However, I really recommend creating workflows or hiring someone to create workflows. They can be very simple. In fact, with the workflows, NetSuite actually provides a template as a starting point for a few different workflows, and one of those is purchase orders. Or you can use the NetSuite's free suite approvals bundle, which can be customized. Or install NetSuite's free three-way match approval workflow that can be customized. Buy a suite app, or buy the advanced NetSuite NetSuite Advanced Procurement module that has approvals already built in. So it has workflows built into that. So just want to show this, not going into detail, but if you go to customization workflows new, it actually, this is the template that's provided from NetSuite free of charge that you can use as a starting point. And it does all sorts of things, allowing approvals, rejections, and then locks it once something's been approved. But if you're going to use this, you do need to go to accounting preferences, the approval routing tab, and go to check purchase orders, because this actually provides a couple extra fields, one of those being the approval status field that you can be pending approval, of approved, rejected. Yes, you can create your own, but why reinvent the wheel? NetSuite is providing that for you. Then there's these two bundles. One is the suite approvals bundle, this one. Now this number, this suite approval bundles provides capabilities for managing approvals for the following types of transactions. So you can copy, you can install this, copy it, and make your own workflows using this as a starting point. It has approval rules. It's got a hierarchical approval for custom approval with the options for users to delegate approval authority. It's been improved over the years. I sat in on a at Suite World at a roundtable with the product manager for this, and they have really been doing a number of improvements for the approvals. Sorry, it's because we're running out of time. I'm trying to go way too fast. So go to Suite Answers to find more information. So then there's this other, then there's this, I'm going back to this P2P process just to show you. Remember we saw this approved 2 to 3-way match? Well, there's another NetSuite approvals workflow. And it's a little bit confusing because if you just search for NetSuite approval workflow, you're going to end up showing 2 different workflows. And you're going, well, why are there 2 bundles with workflows? I don't really understand. But this is a very specific workflow that sets up 3-way matching between the PO, the item receipt, and the vendor bill. And it checks for discrepancies between the purchase order, the item receipt, and the bill, and then it'll automatically route to an assigned supervisor for review and approval. It's got lots of benefits, but it has a key limitation here. Item receipts that have been partially received are not supported. I have personally not played with this yet, so I can't give you any more information about it, but here again, I've given you some Suite Answers to find out more information. Then finally, the NetSuite Advanced Procurement module. I think this is a really great module. If you haven't already done a bunch of workarounds, but what I love most about this is the requisitions, and I'm going to have a slide about that because the value that it provides. So it provides the ability to do requisitions instead of a direct purchase order, and a requisition can actually be done from inside the employee center, or if you have a user seat and maybe you don't have access to entering purchase order itself. I think this has incredible value, the requisitions in and of itself. Then it also handles blanket purchase orders and also request for vendor quotes and purchase contracts. And the vendor can actually reply to you, and it's captured in NetSuite. And then finally, it comes with the procurement dashboard. What I love about it most is this purchase requisitions, which I didn't know anything about until I started putting together this presentation. And the demo account I have does have that, so I got to play around with it a little. The most wonderful thing about this is that the person entering the requisition doesn't need to know the vendor. See, in a purchase request, they need to know who the vendor is. and the price. And of course, the price can be changed, but here they don't even need to know the vendor. And they can actually create a requisition for multiple parts. And because you don't need to know the vendor, once it's been received and goes through the process, you can actually assign that vendor. So if you've got someone in manufacturing floor going, oh, we need these parts, and they could just put in a purchase request, a requisition, I should say, a requisition for these parts, and they don't need to know which vendor, and they can put them all in one purchase requisition. That's so cool. Additionally, what I think is really cool is that it can consolidate demand from many employees into one purchase order. So you've got two different employees both saying, hey, I need a new chair, an office chair. Maybe you've got 5 going, I need a new office chair. So you get those requisitions, and then you can consolidate that into one purchase order automatically, you know, going through some steps with the requisitions, and maybe get a better price. So I just think this is very cool. Go to Suite Answers to get more information about this. And that is basically what we've covered today. So are there any questions on anything that I haven't answered? Any questions? Because now I can have 5 more minutes, according to Corey. Or if there aren't any questions, you know, I can pass it over to Corey. The only thing, don't ask any questions about break time. I'm sure you don't have any. So if there's anything that hasn't been addressed, or you think that might be, the question is a little more complex, so you don't want to ask in front of everybody, again, this is my email. And if it's a quick question, I can answer it. If it's a question that a lot of people have, I will post the question and the answer on LinkedIn. And if you found any errors in this presentation, please do not hesitate to email me and let me know so I can make those corrections. Oh, by the way, I am going on vacation. So it could be a week from tomorrow that I'd be actually looking at your questions. So.
Margie, there is a question. Is there a charge for approval workflows?
No, not if you're using the 2 bundles that I mentioned here. These are both, these are both free. This one, 203, yeah, that's the one you asked about. It is free. And this one is also free.
And you can always build your own custom workflow approvals.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Margie. Awesome job. And I'm going to go ahead and take over the presentation from here. And as I talked about at the beginning, I have a slide on the Boston data center outage, which is something we don't want to have to talk about, but we thought it would be good to just bring this up. So I'm going to take the screen share. So I have a slide here on the Boston data center outage. So this happened on February 14th, and it was an outage for approximately 24 hours. The information that I heard was that there was some sort of event inside this data center, such like a fire or some smoke or something like that, and they had to shut off the power to the data center. Don't take my word for this. This is just what I've heard through the grapevine. And they had to shut it down, and it caused the customers that were using or where their NetSuite instance was on this data center to be unable to access NetSuite for a 24-hour period. I've been involved in the NetSuite world for a decade now, and I've never seen anything like this. It's extremely rare when this happens. And so that's, you know, it was quite an issue. So anyway, there's this to understand what your the service level commitments. There's a URL here, netsuite.com/SLC for service level commitments. It talks about NetSuite's guarantee of uptime, and then there's this in Suite Answers. There's this service credit request section that tells you how to request a credit for outages that go above and beyond the service level. That, you know, basically, if you have an outage for a specific amount of time, there's a chart that can tell you you're potentially you can get a credit for up to 25% of that month's chart NetSuite fee. So Anyway, there's a Suite Answers article 97409. You can go to that, go to Suite Answers, type in that number. It'll bring up the article. You have to submit your request for a service credit. You email billing@netsuite.com with the following information: company name and account number, period for which you are seeking credit, and then the submitter's name and role with the company. There's also a 30-day requirement, so you have to submit it within 30 days from the end of the month, in the month that it happened. So by my calculation, the outages, the service credit request for this outage must be submitted by March 28th. So that is only what's less than 2 weeks away from this point. So anyway, any information you need, yes.
Can I throw in, Renee is saying that she's reached out twice and hasn't heard back. And they do say specifically, Renee, that if you don't hear back from them, that they acknowledge receipt of it, that you need to send it again. And so I had to do it twice also, but they did respond the second time. So I would just bombard them until they respond.
Agreed. Yep. So that's it on that topic. And then I do have a short tip and trick to share that is related to what we talked about today, or what Margie presented on. So I'm going to just kind of go real quick and then move into our open forum. So I'm going to share my screen again, and this time I'm going to come into a demo account. So what I want to show is just a quick tip and trick, and it has to do with creating purchase orders. And this can actually be used for any record type. But what I want to do is I want to create a purchase order via a CSV import. And I think a lot of time purchase orders lend themselves well to this type of creation method, because some people like to export the data out of NetSuite to determine what they need to purchase, the quantities and all of that. And they like to do the slicing and dicing in Excel. And then instead of using the order item screen in NetSuite, which can be a little bit challenging at times to use, you can do a CSV import to create these purchase orders. So doing a CSV import is not really the tip and trick that I want to show today, but what I want to show is when you create a CSV file, you can, for the headers in your CSV file, the tip is to use the internal ID of the field that you're uploading to. And when you use the internal ID of the field as the header, then when you go to do the import, NetSuite automatically maps directly to the field. It knows exactly which field you want to map it to. So I'll just show you real quick. On the purchase order, to find the internal ID of a specific field, you would typically click on the field. So if you have, I have a plugin, I think, that's showing me that internal ID. But if you wanted to copy it, you can click on the field and then copy the internal ID right there. Now, if you click on the field and it's not showing the field ID, that means that you need to set your preferences to show the internal ID. So to do that, you would go to hover over the home icon, go to set preferences, and then there's this option right here called show internal IDs. And when that option is set, then on any record that you are looking at in NetSuite, you'll be able to see the internal ID by clicking on the field itself. And as Margie mentioned at the very beginning of her presentation, the entity, the term entity is used for many different record types: customers, vendors, employees, things like that in NetSuite. And so the field ID here is entity, but we can see in the UI it says vendor. So anyway, I'm just going to do a quick demonstration of importing this CSV. So I've created a CSV file, and when you do it this way, it makes you assign an external ID. I like to assign an external ID of just like today's date. And if you have more than one PO in one day, you can say, like, this is 3/15/2023 and then -1. And so really the external ID doesn't do much for you, except for NetSuite requires one. And then what you'll also notice in a couple of these fields, I have just a number, and that number represents the internal ID of that entity record. So the internal ID of the vendor I'm gonna create it is 518. The internal ID of the employee, which is my employee record in this account, is 1511. The internal ID of the subsidiary is 2. And then sometimes you can do the item internal ID as well, but you can also just use the item name. I like to use the internal IDs because it sometimes if you have a number and then a name for a vendor or an employee, it's hard to get that matched just right in the CSV import process. So I have this CSV import prepared. I'm going to go ahead and go back to NetSuite, and I'm going to go to where you get to the import function is a little bit different based on your role. I'm using an administrator role, so it's under import export and then import CSV records. And then real quick before I do that, I just want you to notice in this file I have this custom field called custom body internal memo. And if we look at that in the UI, that's this field right here. So this might be just a memo that you want to use that doesn't get printed on a PDF that you send to your vendor or anything like that. And so if I click on that, you can see the internal ID of that is custom body internal memo. And then in my CSV import file, that's the same thing in the header. I'm going to go to my import assistant and I'm going to choose a transaction type, or the transaction is the type of import. I'm going to choose purchase order for the record type that I'm going to create. I need to find the file that I want to import. Give me just a second to do that. Sorry, I took this off screen. Okay, here we go. This. Okay, I'll go ahead and close that then. All right, CSV import template. Oh, sorry, I need to save that as a CSV first. Just 1 second. Thought I had that saved as a CSV, but I guess not. Okay, so I'll save this as my uploads, CSV type. Yes. Okay. So now I'll go here. I'll find my uploads folder. There's my template. Okay, and so we'll go through this process. Oh, shoot. So if I get this blank error message, I'm just going to delete all of those fields in there, highlight everything, delete all of those, and then save again. NetSuite's pretty picky about that. Let's just try this again. Okay, so now I deleted all those blank fields. So in this case, I'm going to add a new record. I don't need to worry about any advanced options right now. And I just want to demonstrate that I use the internal ID of all of those fields that I want to upload to, and you can see that in the UI for the mapping, it automatically found the right field that I want to map that to. Now, I know that in some of these fields, I had an internal ID set instead of just the employee name, for example. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, oh, this is the internal ID. That's the value that I'm giving you. This one is also the internal ID, the value that I'm giving. And then let's see, external ID, subsidiary, I know was also an internal ID. The date is fine. The item is not an internal ID, and there's my quantity. So I'm going to go ahead and just go hit next and then run. And then once this is done, should just take a minute here. Okay, and then I'm going to go find the PO that I just created. Should be the most recent one. And here it is. So this is the purchase order I just created. It mapped everything correctly. And imagine if you had, 100 lines of items on here that you needed to add to the PO. This is a very efficient way to create that purchase order. So that's it for my tip and trick using the internal IDs for CSV imports. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing. And if there's any questions or comments on that, we can talk about it now. Oh, Amy, yeah, Kenneth said it's, yeah, the internal IDs is under the home icon. Here, I'll share again real quick. You go to the home, set preferences, and then it's internal IDs right here under this main section. Okay. All right, that's it. Oh, Amy found it. Okay, good. All right, I'll go ahead and stop sharing. And at this point, we can go ahead and move into our open forum. I'm going to stop recording. And if